We're going live on YouTube. Okay, great. Looks like we're live on YouTube now. Welcome everybody over on YouTube. If you're on YouTube, please put your name and location into the comments. And let me make sure YouTube is muted so we don't have an echo. There we go. Okay, great. So welcome everybody on YouTube. Welcome everybody on Zoom. I am so glad to have you here. And let's see who's on so far. Welcome Nancy in Michigan. Welcome Batumi in Georgia, or Ilse in Batumi, Georgia. Welcome. Sorry if I said that wrong. Welcome Iris in China. Welcome, welcome. Welcome Riva in Ireland, Jillian in Surrey, UK. Welcome Diane in Boston, Luzia in Austria, Beth in Illinois, Nancy in Florida, Emuna in West Virginia, Masawomek and Manaoak land. Thank you for stating the Indigenous peoples that were originally on your land. Welcome Pauline in Montreal. Welcome Julia in Cape Town, South Africa. Welcome Penny in Atlanta, Maria in Northern Sweden, Anita in San Diego. Welcome everybody. Yay, I'm so glad to have you here. Now I need to bring in Daniel here. And I think there are some technical difficulties going on. Yes. Yes, okay. We're working out some technical difficulties. I'm emailing with Daniel right now. You know, Mars is in retrograde, and so it's interesting. We had a technical issue last night with Daniel Scranton last night in Eastern time where he wasn't able to join because of some confusion about the time zone because he was traveling, and I guess there was a mix-up about what time zone he would be in. And then it looks like Daniel Giamario is having some technical issues with his computer. So Mars in retrograde, let's just talk about that for a moment. Mars in retrograde started on October 30th and will go till I think it's January 13th. And Mars in retrograde in Gemini. Okay, this is the important point here. Mars in retrograde in Gemini, because Gemini represents the same things that Mercury does: communications, technology, transportation. This Mars retrograde has the potential, this is not the only outcome that can be, but it has the potential of being like a Mercury retrograde on steroids, literally, because Gemini represents all the things that Mercury does. And Mars is retrograde in Gemini, and Mars represents war, aggression, conflict, you know, chaos that comes from conflict and aggression. So when Mars is retrograde in Gemini, we can have major disruptions to the technology, major disruptions to the communication system. So I think that's a little bit of what's happening here. Let me see what Daniel's latest note says. If that doesn't work, I'm going to see if he can call in. Because we're going to have this meeting. We are definitely going to have this meeting. Let me give him the list of Zoom phone numbers. We will make this happen, guys. Okay, gave him again the list of phone numbers. So hopefully that will work. Let me just check and see. Okay, bear with me, guys. We're going to make this one happen. It's just quite an interesting journey these days with this event and doing the live interviews. Very interesting. I've been doing events with live interviews since I think I started in 2018. And I love doing the live interviews because I love engaging with all of you amazing people out there in the world. And it's just so fun to be in real time with all of you and with our speakers. Yay, Daniel's here. Daniel's on. I just saw him pop in. Okay, great. Let me bring you over, Daniel. And what I was going to say is, I really never have had many technical difficulties until this year. And this is a different kind of experience. We've had a couple now. So here, Daniel, let me bring you over. And you will be joining me as a panelist in one moment here. Yay, I see you're popping up here. Wonderful. Welcome, Daniel.
Yes.
Hello.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, excuse me for being one to add to your technical challenges. Boy, if you think you've frustrated, you can't imagine how it's been for me the last 10 days. I have a new computer coming in tomorrow, but it's not available right now. So I have this strange situation where I can get beautifully on Zoom, but there's no browser, right? It's just an app. And the other computer doesn't link to Zoom or Skype or anything. So anyway, here we are.
Yeah. Well, here we are. You're here. I was just saying a few words about Mars retrograde in Gemini and the challenges that could bring, because it's been an interesting journey so far with the conference here and the live interviews. So yeah, well, I'm so glad that you're here, Daniel, and it is truly an honor to have you here as part of our event. Thank you so much for being a part of it. And let me just go ahead and introduce you to everybody in case there's anyone here who doesn't know about your work yet. So Daniel Giamario is the founder and president of the Turning of the Ages Mystery School and creator of the Shamanic Astrology paradigm, also known as the Giamario approach. He joins together an academic background in comparative philosophy and religion with teaching meditation in 2 worldwide organizations and extensive world travel. Daniel learned astrology in the late 1960s and was part of Dane Rudhyar's transpersonal astrology movement in the 1970s. After a vision quest experience on Mount Shasta in 1981, his astrological vision and spiritual path became more earth-centered, and a shamanically oriented astrology was born. For many years, his specialty has been connecting astrology to the night sky at secluded locations and sacred sites in an as above, so below direct experience. He has been a full-time astrological consultant since 1984 and currently has a large mentoring practice and an apprenticeship program. This astrology has evolved as a rich blend of psychological, mythological, spiritual, and shamanistic elements, specifically designed to assist in the unfoldment of the individual's life purpose and in navigating this pivotal point of the turning of the ages. Daniel has written 2 books, the Shamanic Astrology Handbook and Origins of the Shamanic Astrology Paradigm, as well as the Shamanic Astrology Divination Card Deck. Daniel lives with his wife, Lynn, in Southeast Asia. His passions are the growing of the Turning of the Ages Mystery School's body of knowledge, further evolution of the Giamario approach, and continued research to obtain answers to his lifelong question, who are we and what has happened? And Daniel, the wonderful topic of your interview today, which I can't wait to dive into with you, is 6 converging timelines at a great turning of the ages. So can you begin by sharing with us, what is this turning of the ages that you're speaking about?
Sure. If I could maybe go back a little bit to explain the genesis of this approach.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. So the very, very first mention of what some called galactic alignment was in a book called Hamlet's Mill in 1969 that influenced a great deal of us. Once I had that vision quest experience at Mount Shasta, I really shifted my work a lot from kind of more of a left brain approach to working with the land and sky directly, and formed an apprenticeship program even at that time period to say that if you're going to do astrology, you have to know the night sky. So therefore, I was spending a lot of time on the land, under the sky, with small groups of people, which is it was during that time that this astrological paradigm came through. However, it was in the 80s that the experience directly with the night sky, myself and really only one other astrologer were talking about it, which had to do with what some called the galactic alignment, but I coined the expression the turning of the ages, which was that there was, at that point, all I was looking at was the point in the precessional cycle, the 26,000-year precessional cycle, and suggesting that it was the end and the beginning of the entire 26,000-year cycle in a certain time period. In our school, we look at the larger overall time frame of the Great Turning as being from 1962 to 2034. But the convergence of the different timelines is actually centered in very much on the time we're in right now. And so this has been a building understanding of the different timelines, including the Kali Yuga, including the different understandings among the Toltecs and Hopi and Mayan about the sixth sun, also the Mayan, some Mayan calendar information, also non-astrological approaches, the fourth turning, which is a historical exploration, which is quite influential in my work, and then also the geological view of the sixth mass extinction, and so therefore we have all of these converging strongly in the time period you want me to talk about, actually, right? Or what your summit is about, which is 2023, 2024, 2025, and woven into this. And I don't. I can't remember exactly what it is I sent as the free bonus.
I can share that now if that would be helpful.
Yeah, was it the US chart stuff or was it something else?
This was yugas versus ages.
No, I don't mean the screen share. I'm talking about the free gift to the people on the.
Oh yes, so for the free gift we have the US chart.
Yeah. Okay, that's what I thought. So that's a whole other part of the story, which is essentially what is happening with the eclipses and the US chart from 2022 through 2025. So if it's okay, I'd like to weave that into it also.
Absolutely, and I just put that link to the free gift in the chat for everybody on live here. And for those who are listening later, just scroll down a bit below the video and you'll see the link to that free gift. So yes, absolutely.
I've done a bunch of intensive articles and research into the US chart in combination with the six converging timelines idea. So maybe that gives you a little bit of background about what led up to this.
Yes, that is very helpful. And it is just so fascinating that all of these timelines, and some of them based on very, very ancient information, are all coming together during these years ahead. So can you tell us what are the USA Pluto return and Chiron return all about, and how are we going to see that?
May I first interject one other thing first, just so people know where I'm coming from in this. This approach to the astrological mysteries has really no connection to prediction or cause and effect kinds of things. Rather, our approach is that if we can discern what the intent of a cycle is, then we can be in harmony with the intent. Now that would apply to an individual chart as well as a global process, the US chart, or I've also spent a fair amount of time looking at the charts of many of the different countries that are in play in world affairs right now, as well as some of the world leaders and so on. So you could apply it to an individual chart, but also to the 26,000-year cycle or the end of Kali Yuga, all those different themes. It's about intent. What is the intent of great mystery? What is the intent of Gaia herself? What is the intent of Christos Sophia at this particular point, which is we can do our part, in being conscious humans to, put what our visions are, but at the same time, we can't pretend like we are completely in charge of that. There's a certain surrender element that's really important.
Right. We have to be willing to work with those larger energies that are moving all of us and moving through us.
Well, as far as the different timelines, let me just, maybe you can put up the that screen share.
Sure, the yugas and the ages.
Mhm.
I will share that right now.
It's actually not.
The
Oh,
bottom.
yeah, that comes across well enough, yes. I will mention that there's so many different versions over the last 150 years that have come forth regarding the yugas, okay? And the one I'm using is the work of Bibhu Dev Mishra, who did really extensive work on it that actually unpacked a lot of the confusion in India and other places regarding the yugas. And what I've done here on this particular slide is put next to each other the way he understood the yuga cycles and the astrological ages, and I put the dates in there. And it turns out that based on the numbers used by the yugas, one entire yuga cycle is 25,352 years, and one entire precessional cycle is 25,920 years. So it's really remarkable how they line up. Also, then I have on this slide also the connection between the different suns. The first sun, second sun, third sun, fourth sun, fifth sun, and actually the way those Aboriginal people perceive the whole thing now is that when you get to the sixth sun, it's like going to the first sun. You know, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the sixth one is like, in a sense, back to the start. I'm using, actually, just so you all know, I'm using the work of Sergio Manana, 2012 through 2021, The Dawn of the Sixth Sun. And so essentially what that view regarding the different suns is taking the time of 2012 to 2021 as the birthing of the sixth sun. So that's like bringing it into the time period we're now in, right? So that's one of the ways of linking up the long count of the Mayan calendar with the different suns. And if you look at the time period of the different suns, it goes back to 26,625 years ago, which is pretty remarkable how similar the overall dates are relative to what we know about the precessional cycle.
That's
The
incredible.
precessional cycle is what I started with, first got into, which is looking at the end and the beginning of the different months of the great year. And so what I've done is I put the dates of the precessional cycles calibrated to the center point of the galactic alignment that happened in 1998. So in 1998, there was the exact point where the solstice aligned with the galactic equator and the ecliptic. And so that's that kind of thing can only happen 4 times in an age, where you have a solstice or an equinox point at that cross, that kind of cosmic cross that's in the sky. Actually, there's a lot of others that have investigated that also. In fact, an old friend of mine who's unfortunately passed away wrote those exceptional books, Mayan Cosmogenesis, Galactic Alignment, John Major Junkins, who went into this in great depth. So what I've done is that I've taken it back to corresponding the astrological ages to the yugas. And it's very intriguing that in the previous golden age, that was the time when the star Deneb, the only possible North Star that's on the galactic equator, that's actually in the Milky Way, was the North Star. Now, a lot of people that have kind of a Eurocentric orientation. Well, how could there be a golden age then? When basically it's all covered with 2 miles of glaciers, right? Except that was not true in portions of Central Europe, and it certainly wasn't true along the equator. And living in Southeast Asia, I've become quite familiar with the Sunderland hypothesis about essentially where quote civilization and maritime activity and pyramid building and all of that was happening during that time period, during the time when Europe was covered in ice. And then the correspondences are amazing, because like right now, the Polaris is our North Star, but Polaris is not in the Milky Way. So basically in the Golden Age, what would happen is that the Milky Way would stand perpendicular to the horizon with Deneb right at the top. And that connects into so many ancient mythic stories that come from Central Asia and Northern Europe about the birds, the vultures, the swans, the eagles that are at the top of the world tree. When essentially the birds of the sky were at the top of the world tree. So this brings us then toward our current time. And according to the way I look at the precessional cycle, if the center point of the galactic alignment that was happening exactly in 1998, and that's kind of a zone of 72 years, which is 1 degree every 360 degrees. Well, that would actually be, and maybe the other slide, it would have been cool to have here, which I didn't think it could. I thought I would have all the ability to screen share this stuff, but is our school teaching device, which used to be our school logo, that shows how the constellations and the signs line up over 26,000 years, where every constellation has a chance to be in alignment with every sign. That, like the age of Taurus, that was essentially when the bull was at the spring equinox. Mm-hmm. And so if you look at it from the constellational perspective, the quote age of Aquarius, not the sign, but the constellation, that started in 1998. And so right in the beginning portion of what would be called the age of Aquarius, but we recommend that we look at all 4 points. So there's not just the spring equinox, but also the fall equinox. The cosmic cross is like aligning with the big 4 of biblical understanding. The bull, the lion, the human, and the scorpion, which was then in that culture was called the eagle. And so when those are lined up with the equinoxes and the solstice, so that's another cross check for the time we're in. That is one of the great turnings. There hasn't been anything like that since back to 5,000-6,000 years ago. I saw a comment come in. When does Polaris is currently, the Earth is pointing toward Polaris, but Polaris itself is never in the Milky Way. So it's only certain, Vega, that was the North Star about 12,000 years ago, is at the edge of the Milky Way, but not directly in it. Only Deneb is. Now, one of the really large areas of inquiry right now, and the man who did this Yuga research was rather vague on the issue, and it's a major area of speculation, is that if we're at the end of the entire Yuga system within a much larger time frame, when you come out of Kali Yuga, it's not a slow ascent through the yugas, but rather it's almost an immediate shift into the next golden age, right? So that's there seems to be a groundswell of insight, opinions, intuition that that's the case. Otherwise, if you go by a normal Yuga cycle, after Kali Yuga, then there's a slow ascent back through the yugas. Are you familiar with how the yugas operate, or shall I maybe explain that a little bit?
I think that would probably be helpful to explain. I'm more familiar with the precessional cycle, and I'm sure all of our audience would appreciate the yugas explained as well.
We can certainly go back to the precessional cycle if that's where you're more familiar. But as far as the yugas go, the idea was that in the 26,000-year time period, there would be a golden age, and the entire heart was available at that point. And then as it went down to the next one after that, you can see here when it goes to the silver age, go to where it is, if you can use your cursor, go to where it says golden, ascending down there, right in that area. And then there would be a transitional period. There's always about a 300-year transitional period. And then it would descend into the silver age. And 3/4 of the human heart was available at that point. And then as it would descend into the Bronze Age, Bronze Age, then what would happen at that point would be only half of the human heart is available. And then as it goes into the Kali Yuga, it's only 1/4. Now that does not mean that only 1/4 of the heart is available to those with open hearts. Okay, it's more like a proportion of the population kind of thing. And from what my teachers tell me, that actually having an open heart in Kali Yuga is far, far more amazing than in the golden age, because in the golden age everybody does, or almost everybody does. So it's like no big deal. But at the end of Kali Yuga, then to keep the heart open in hell kind of thing is the important issue here. And but the other factors is, from some of the people that I've researched with, patriarchy only happens in Kali Yuga. That basically for the rest of human history, I'm only talking about one yuga now. I mean, I'm also really into looking at 300,000 years of history, but in the only at the very, you'll know it's Kali Yuga when patriarchy happens. It only happens at the deepest descent, which I think is an extremely interesting, that comes from the Aboriginal teachings, actually.
Very interesting, yeah.
So it's also, of course, a journey into density. And some of the greatest of all spiritual teachers of the 20th century, and I'll list Sri Aurobindo and I'll list Rudolf Steiner, they both were very much into involution, bringing spirit into matter. And if you're in a golden age, spirit doesn't have to come into matter because it's basically all spirit. It's like a less dense area. But now we're in a very dense time. And so the whole journey of spirituality is bringing our full awareness into the deepest density. And that would be called the journey of involution, which is an important feature of our type of astrology that we're involved with. Did that help?
Very helpful. Yes, it's fascinating for me to hear this about the yugas, because I've studied the precessional cycle, as I mentioned, and particularly through the lens of Egypt and what we see written in the temples, particularly in the temple of Dendera, right? And so it illustrates this same kind of fall of consciousness, and at Leo being shown as Zep Tepi, the original time, and then we fall through these ages and become more dense and based on the body rather than our higher consciousness, through time. So very fascinating to see the correlations there.
Well, and then speaking of the Egyptian transmissions, the Sphinx, a lion-like being, is facing due east. And so it's actually a representative of the mirror image of where it is now. So basically, it kind of, whether it was actually, I personally think the Sphinx is much older than having been built at the time of the pyramids, but that's also in question. But I know the Sphinx goes much further back. In fact, I would suggest it goes back to the time of Göbekli Tepe. But it's facing due east when the lion was rising in the east.
Yes.
But now if you're looking toward due east, it's the water bear that's rising in the east. So the sky is actually a mirror image of what it was then. You know, so it's kind of like a clock, a cosmic clock. And putting the Sphinx on four, you know, the exact cardinal directions and having it face as a lion toward the east, you know.
Like a timestamp for the age of Leo. Yes. And related to Deneb as well, and the constellation Cygnus, I know it seems to be increasing research that many of the Göbekli Tepe structures are pointing toward Cygnus and possibly toward Deneb, which is.
I had the opportunity some years ago to go to Göbekli Tepe with Andrew Collins, who's written some of the more interesting books on the Deneb connection. Yes. And the Denisovans, and you know, like the different crossbreedings of DNA that are in human beings.
Yes, his research is quite fascinating. Yes. So, and now the geologic time over here on the right is that's just showing how this lines up with the ages.
So here we have the last glacial maximum between 33,000 and 19,000 years ago. So the most extreme glaciation was right at that same point, you know, around 26,000 years ago. Soon after that, about 19,000 years ago, deglaciation slowly begins. And then there is this very unusual time period in our geological history, where just as everything was melting slowly, there was this time period of about 1,200 years called the Younger Dryas, where there's a quick freeze. Things froze up worse than during the glacial maximum. And that, you know, there's several, probably the best view of it, including some research that's happened, is that there was a cometary strike that happened in either northern Canada, Greenland, and that area, more than one probably. It's alleged to have been from the Tauride meteor shower, which comes around every so often. We're in its path. Actually, we're in its path right now, quite frankly. But this is not, yeah. But this is supposedly not the time where we enter the densest portion of the Tauride meteors, but they are. This is that we're having this conversation during the Tauride time. It's called Tauride because they're coming out of the constellation of Taurus. Right? That's how you locate where they're coming out. Anyway, it froze down for 1,200 years, and then something weird, even weirder, happened. People like Robert Schoch believes that it was all about solar activity that happened, and so you had this really major melting that happened that raised the oceans 300 meters in a very short period of time as the ice all melted. And it's very interesting that in the Glastonbury zodiac, and the ancient zodiac of the British Isles, they don't have, where they locate the constellation of Cancer, which is following the age of Leo, right, is they don't have it as a crab. Actually, not too many cultures had it as a crab. They had it as a ship, a boat, with the rising waters. And there was a lot of, you know, let's get out of the flooded areas and go someplace where it's not flooded.
Oh, so I just thought, interesting. Yeah, similar in Egypt. Cancer is represented showing Isis, Osiris, and Horus on boats. I had not ever thought of it that way before.
Yeah, actually, I think that one of the Egyptian zodiacs has it as a scarab beetle.
That is tied to Zeb Tepi, yes, the scarab beetle.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Although the ancient Sumerian zodiac, interestingly, has it as a crab. It's a very it's same thing with there was like a story that was going around for a long time that the Scorpion constellation extended to the stars of Libra, when in fact in the ancient Babylonian and Sumerian glyphs, it was the scales. So further back there was 12, and one of them was the scales. The one that was very different was what we call the ram. Aries the ram. Among the Sumerians, it was called a field hand, the hireling. So it was actually an indentured servant, actually. So you can imagine that when the age of Aries started, they're not going to have that be the leading edge, the leading animal or symbol for the age. So they turned it into a ram.
Wow, fascinating. Yes.
And so what I was saying before about how during a 26,000 year, yeah, I can agree with that. Thank you, Naraya. I just, every now and then, it's hard for me to watch the chat on the side, but I'll see one pop up, so let me know if I miss anything. What was I going to say here? Yikes, no, I did lose my train. Can you remember what I was saying?
Well, we were just talking about the geologic time, and you had talked about that major rise in sea levels. Now with the sun to land hypothesis that you had mentioned, so at that rise in sea levels 11,700 years ago, then there must be a huge amount of human civilization that is just hidden underwater now at this time.
It's
right?
actually the South China Sea, actually, because during the Sundaland time period, what we see as Malaysia, what extended far south, and so that it joined up with Borneo and parts of the Philippines. All of the islands of Indonesia were like connected to this massive subcontinent. However, the area that got flooded out was the Great Plain where all the grain was and all the food was being grown. And that's all like 300 meters underwater at this point in the South China Sea. I had the opportunity actually to go to a place called Gunung Padang in Java, which is an ancient pyramid structure that different layers of it go down 22,000 years.
Amazing. And is that underwater or is that above water?
No, that's on land. That's
Okay.
that one didn't go underwater. That's on the island of Java.
Okay.
When I lived in Bali for a while, I was going to Bali a lot. Myself and some of my friends took a trip over there. There's a fair amount written about it. It's quite an interesting place, but it's very controversial because the Islamic culture there doesn't want to have to deal with it, because it takes them back into a situation that is before their transmission.
Yeah. Yes. So interesting. Yeah, I love this topic of how far back do actually very advanced human civilizations go, and it's a bit off topic for for what we're discussing here, but I'm just so curious what you might think about, looking at these precessional ages, and how far back do you think we did have advanced civilizations?
Well, actually, it's not on here. I could have put it on here. I've recently come to have the feeling that not only are we at the end and the beginning of the precessional age, and this was an insight that came from one of the persons that I often follow, is a woman named Lisa Renee, who basically suggests that we're at the end of the beginning of 12 precessional cycles. So it's really over 300,000 years. And the thing I find intriguing about that, every year because of discoveries that are being made. It pushes further back the presence of our type of human. You know, and so it's about 300,000 years, you know.
Wow.
And since I've actually been here in Asia, I've become very familiar with not out of Africa thesis, but the into Africa thesis from Australia. And
Interesting.
yeah, that's essentially what is coming from that part of the world right now. And you can actually, there's anomalies in the DNA that it's not possible, that it, how do we say, due to the mutations that happen in the DNA, it's actually older than the out of Africa thesis, you know, which only takes it back a certain point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. It's a great turning. Yes, so it's not just any old turning of the ages, right? We all thought that was happening in the late '60s, but that was the naivete and the hubris of the baby boom generation, you know, to think that that was the time, you know, when in fact
it's the lead up, right? In this grand scale, it's not actually very
no, it's
not
not
at all. Just a couple seconds apart.
In the 1962 date, if you use 1962 to 2034, it was in 1962, there was 7-planet alignment in Aquarius. And so many astrologers at that time, it's like, that's the beginning of the age of Aquarius, right? Until I was taken into a library at one point by a very elderly woman in Nevada City, California, who showed me her library of all these books written in the 1920s about the age of Aquarius, the new age, you know. So, so these ideas go back at least to the time of Sri Yukteswar at the end of the 1800s.
Right. Now, you say that this goes from, you mentioned 1962 to 2034. So how does that all come together? And, you know, what do we need to know about that time frame? Because clearly we're right smack in the middle of it now.
Yeah, and the sixth world material is that the real turning point was 2012 to 2021. I haven't even mentioned the fourth turning yet. That might be something we can weave in when we talk about the US chart.
Okay, wherever you think it would be best, we can go there now if you'd like.
I forgot to ask, you know, because I wasn't able to get on early to have a conversation with you. Yeah. How long are these interviews?
About an hour. And, you know, we can see if we have time, we can take questions from the chat. We could go to 1 hour and 15 minutes if we need to.
Okay, all right, that's good for me to know. So we'll have a chance to cover everything we want to cover.
Yes.
But the 1962 through 2034, what that comes from is the 360 degrees, in the circle, and the precessional cycle is 1 degree every 72 years. So it's like 36 years on either side of 1998.
I see. Okay.
That's where so we're past the midpoint, but you know, there's still a ways to go. If you went by the Kali Yuga stuff, and you thought that we're not going to, maybe if we don't go soon into Sat Yuga, there's still about a 300-year transitional time period. And a lot can happen in that 300-year time period. So that's I think that's what you're asking about.
Yes, that's helpful to know that that's a slice of the precessional cycle pie. That's the 1 year, or the 72 years, the 1 degree. That's helpful.
Where we came up with that, and it's just using the sacred numbers. But you could also take it back. There has been an alternative view, which is that you could have a 1 degree on either side, you know, so then it's 144 years.
Yes. Now, so would you like to share with us next about the fourth turning? Is that a good place to go from here?
Sure. There's a book that was written in the 1990s And it had to do with, first of all, the first book was called Generations, and then the second book was called The Fourth Turning. And it was a look at European and American history. It was based around this idea that came from the ancient Etruscans, that this is back before Rome. And the Etruscan idea was, by the way, it was a matrilineal culture, is that they noticed that at any given time period, the oldest elder was about 90 years old. And so they looked at that and they said, well, within the 90-year time period, 4 generations turn over. And I've actually applied that idea to our astrological interpretations, but if applied to a nation or history, there will be, if you have a starting point, like 1776, for example, there was a fourth turning around the Civil War, and there was a fourth turning just before World War II. And then the exact point of the ending of the current fourth turning is 2024, 2025. And that corresponds to all the rest of this. And when you have it all turns over at a fourth turning, okay? And I've looked at that from the perspective of the US chart and combined with the other things that are happening currently and as we go into 2023, 2024 on the US chart. But that's the idea behind the fourth turning. It's a more extensive thing about the differences between the generations. I was born in 1948, so I happen to be in that group of folks that were very much rebelling against the previous culture, right? And we thought that with such a lot of naivete, I really thought all you have to do is go to college and you'll come out like wanting to overturn the system or something. Little did I know that wasn't the case. But it has to do with the nature of the next generation that happened after and the one after. And now we're in a new generation. We're the one that started about 2001. That's the whole new generation. I mean, that's the one after the millennials.
Okay, very interesting.
And there's a different suggestions have been used for how to name that one. And
yes.
the one that I like the most is the iGen.
iGen, yes, well, that's appropriate. Everything has a little I in front of it these days.
Right, that's right. Or smart gen or something like that.
Yeah, then yes, it's so interesting. The kids now will need to be our leaders through these very intense decades coming up. So yes. Now, would it be helpful for me to share the US chart?
Sure.
The date that you had given me. Let me go to that. And let me know if you want any different asteroids or chart points on here than what I have. This is what
I wish I would have gotten you the one that I use, because I don't know, I could be surprised here.
Yes.
Wow.
See if it will do.
This is cool. You use the whole sign house system.
I do. Yes, I do.
Yeah. In our school, we've been using that since 1999, actually.
Very good. I much prefer it for many reasons.
It solves a lot of problems, and it goes back to the original form of house placements, house system. Right. I use the Dane-Ridjar rectification of the Sibley chart. And I find it, I know there's different views about that, but I find this one works quite well. And we're about to hit the third exact point of Pluto on US Pluto, which is coming up in December. But sometimes what gets lost in the discussion is the Neptune opposition. And in the way that in our school we render the initiatory windows, the last portion of the Neptune opposing Neptune is coming up in December also. But the thing I note, that also corresponds to US history, what was happening at the previous Neptune opposition and the Neptune squares. I have a lot of that stuff written up in the free gift.
And would you like me to put the current transits on here? Would that be helpful for the discussion?
Not the most. Let me just go a little bit further before you do that.
Sure.
Unless you want to.
No, I can wait.
So the thing that really has captured my attention the most, other than, of course, the Neptune opposition and the Pluto return, is the fact that the US chart has the Neptune square Mars in Gemini. And when you combine a look at the US history with the fourth turning information and in the different Neptune cycles and different other time periods that correspond to the fourth turnings, to me, the Mars in Gemini, of course, is a symbol on the US chart for the tendency of the US to love to bifurcate. In fact, the founding fathers must have known something about this because they warned against a two-party system. And yet, if you just look on the chart, you know, it's like bifurcation like crazy, you know, and it happened in the Civil War. It happened in the 1930s. During the previous run up to the Great Turning, or rather to the fourth turning, you had the two different approaches to how to deal with the world. There was the New Deal, or there was Nazi. You know, those are the two ways of you know, restructuring the world. But now we have a whole different set of choices coming up. But the bifurcation, I think, is a huge ingredient in the US psyche. And now you can look at it in many, many different ways, you know, vaxxed versus unvaxxed, red versus blue, you know, team red, team blue, different states, you know, they just go on and on about that particular stuff. But I think it's a feature also of the puer nature of the United States, because the original, the Europeans that came over, and before that the Spanish, but I'll just put it, they didn't bring their elders. I mean, it turns out their elders were already here. You know, in other words, the incredible elder knowledge of the Native American groups, actually they were respected at first by the Europeans. And a lot of the wisdom that came from them went into the Age of Enlightenment and into the revolutions that happened in Europe and so on. But they left out a lot of things. You know, they turned it into something different. But for the most part, I follow the work of people like Martine Prechtel and Stephen Jenkinson that refer to Canada and the US as being a orphan culture, you know, basically not being rooted, not having our indigenous roots so much, but then also not having elders, and that causes the lack of the capacity to grieve the disconnect from the land and not having had elders. I respect the work of those people a great deal, and that then takes us back to the Pluto return. In the type of astrology that we teach in our school, my favorite word to describe Pluto is composting. So in a Pluto cycle individually or to a country, what needs to be composted will become composted. And then, of course, out of compost comes new life, new shoots. I find that to be a more potent imagery these days than the phoenix rising from the ashes. I mean, which is one that's been used. But I mean, so there's a lot about Western culture that is being composted, and that will cause, hopefully, at a certain point, grieving. But not grieving of losing finally having a chance to grieve that we've been disconnected.
Wow.
How I would like
Yes.
to put it.
That's a really good way of putting the Pluto's intent, is the composting. Very accurate.
It gets even more remarkable when you get to 2024, with the Chiron return, the 5th US Chiron return. And the previous Chiron returns did not indicate in US history This is the US chart. I just saw that thing pop
Oh,
up there.
yes. Oh, okay. There was a question. Yes, you can see the date and time up here. This is the US chart.
The current Mars transit of 7 months in Gemini, there's going to be many time periods in the current transit. In fact, 3 times. It's like a triple square of Neptune Mars in these upcoming months. I think when Mars stays in the same sign for 7 months, which it does about every 26 months, it acts very much like an outer planet transit. You know, so therefore we have Mars back and forth for a long period of time, right over the US Mars.
Yeah, Mars is right about, isn't Mars at 22 degrees right now, I think? Very
Right
close.
at the moment it's 20, let's see, I actually created the chart for today. Not only, today it's 2434 retrograde.
Okay.
But what is interesting additionally about today, and it's another factor going into the 2024, 2025 time, is the rapid approach of the lunar standstill, where the out of bounds moons are the most extreme. And we are in an extreme out of bounds moon right now.
Interesting.
Almost 27 degrees. And so it's almost 3.5 degrees beyond the ecliptic.
And
Right.
how often does that happen? I don't know a lot about the out of bounds moon.
Well, out of bounds moons can only happen if the moon is in late Gemini, early Cancer, or late Sagittarius, early Capricorn. In other words, near the solstices. However, they go most out of bounds, most extreme every 19 years. So, I mean, I was born in 1948. 1950 was the exact time period. And so I have an out of bounds Capricorn moon. And if you're born, so the years that you'd have to be born close to would be 1950, 1969, 1987, 2006, and then 2024, 2025 are the time periods of the most extreme moons. And there's one of the most important experiences of my whole life was being at the Great Stone Circle in the Outer Hebrides called Callanish in 1987, when the moon walked on the land. Because at that latitude, the low moon, nearest to summer solstice, skims along the surface of the horizon and then crosses the stones. You know, it's quite a remarkable phenomenon. The ancients knew about that.
Wow, yes, it's been an amazing time to
somebody just said they were there in 2007. Interesting. Yeah, I was there in 2006, actually. I hope to be there in 2024. I'm not sure. Let's see, 1931. But I think if you have one of those moons I mentioned, it's possible that your moon would have been out of bounds in 1934. I mean, right now, if somebody's born right today, their moon is way out of bounds. And today, actually, as we speak, it's at 2642. By tomorrow, it's over 27. Out of bounds. So if the people are wondering, what does out of bounds moon mean? Well, one level of it has to do with how ancient people did ceremony with it. And I personally think back in Neolithic times, it's when they would have the great gatherings. You know, there would be kind of Neolithic Woodstocks, you know, where they'd get together as trade fairs, and they would, you know, at that time, you couldn't marry someone from your own tribe. It had to be from outside your tribe, you know, so the different gathering of the tribes, there would be, you know, matchmaking and trade fairs and ceremony and, you know, feasts and that kind of thing. That would happen during the lunar standstill time. On an individual chart, it's the word I like to use for it. Where's your moon?
My moon is in Scorpio.
Okay.
At,
No, so it's probably
like,
not out of bounds then, but
no, I'm 78. I'm not. Nope. I wouldn't
right.
be.
No, that would not be. The uh, the word I most love for out of bounds moon is unassimilatable.
Hmm.
And it's sort of like I have actually one person in our school has this. It's like okay, it's kind of like having Mercury retrograde, left-handedness, and Rh negative blood. And if you put that all together, and then with an out of bounds moon, then you're absolutely, completely unassimilable.
Interesting.
And these are the maverick eccentrics. So if you have an out of bounds moon in Capricorn, then you are taking it to Capricorn where it's not been before, outside the boundaries of Capricorn or Sagittarius or Cancer or Gemini.
So it can be, it sounds like it can be somebody who's maybe ahead of their time, or for some reason is not the same as all the rest, right? What maybe could
Right. I'm not like,
later
it's
that
like the
way.
old song, I'm not like everybody else, it's
Yeah.
like, but it's, sometimes they're just eccentrics,
Yeah.
as opposed to necessarily being leading edge, but
Yeah.
it's just not wanting to go along with the consensus.
So how can we navigate all of this as all of these ages are coming together, this massive time frame for the US, which of course impacts the entire world politics?
There's, yes, I would like to address that, but I just wanted to bring one other factor in, and
Sure.
those that have the free gift will see my article about it. I'll just mention it right now. That is that there's this really bizarre, strange, unusual thing happening in 2023, 2024, where 5 different eclipse pathways cross continental US. The pathway of the 2017 one tracks the one in 2024, but also 3 different eclipses, one in 2012, one in 2017, and one in 2023, all are originating off of the Oregon coast and are tracking across the US. And in fact, there's 2 of them that cross right around the Mississippi River, but they also, another one of them crosses in Texas. In fact, 3 different eclipse paths from 2012 to 2024 cross in Texas.
Wow. And now are these solar eclipses?
They're all solar eclipses, including annular total eclipses. And which I include in the same category as regular total eclipse. I mean, the one that's on everybody's mind is the crossing of the 2017 one, with the one in 2024. But there's this convergence of these other eclipse pathways in Texas, including, as I mentioned, the ones that originated off the Oregon coast. 3 different ones. It's just I couldn't even believe it when I first noticed this. Where did I write that note over here? No, it's not
That
there.
is quite fascinating.
Sorry. But no, 2012, 2017, and 2023, there are eclipse pathways that originated right off the Oregon coast and then crisscross in the Texas area. And I don't know, I mean, I don't know to what extent you get into eclipses, but I do think that where they actually, I mean, solar eclipses now, the pathway does have an importance, looking back and looking forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And so does that mean something for Texas, do you believe, or how to work with that information?
Well, I mean, you can, first of all, there is a side of working with eclipses that certainly has to do with the shadow, so therefore it can bring up a lot of the Plutonian stuff, and one of them is exactly with the Chiron return. I mean, it's just amazing the connection points between the eclipses and the US chart, as well as the landmass. There is the shadow aspect of it, but I think because a solar eclipse is like a super new moon, It's just that it's expanded to at least 3 years, maybe longer. So whatever you do on a new moon, you can expand that out. You know, you're planting seeds of intention. You know, so you can blast into some hope for intended future. You know, but you can't totally go into just love and light about it, because eclipses do demand looking at the shadow elements.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm glad to know you're a Scorpio moon, so you would agree with me about that.
I do. I understand about initiatory eclipse energy.
Pardon me?
Especially this year. I said I understand about initiatory eclipse energy, especially after this last year.
Do you have the Taurus Scorpio axis then also?
Yes. So I have my my moon and Uranus are in 12th house in Scorpio. So it's and square my sun. So Saturn, Uranus have been squaring and opposing my sun.
Yeah, right. Yeah, a good 50, probably more than 50% of my clientele now are in the crosswires of the Saturn Uranian thing for the last 2 years. But I guess what I was curious about was also those individuals that have the nodal axis, you know, at around 10 to 15 Taurus Scorpio.
Yeah,
those are showing up a lot now too.
Yes, fortunately for me, I don't have my nodes there. But
okay, so I know we're going to run out of time here. So, what to do? May I suggest what?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. We have as a kind of a signature approach in our school what we call the 3 worlds approach, and it comes from core shamanism. And we kind of divide even the planetary initiation processes into upper, middle, and underworld. Upper world, middle world, and lower world. And you know, you could say upper world is celestial, you could say underworld or lower world. The 3 worlds. And Uranus and Neptune would be upper, Saturn, Jupiter in the nodes, middle, and then Chiron and Pluto, underworld. And so we feature those a lot. So the suggestion is to, as best we can, keep all 3 in mind at the same time. Which isn't to say that from the perspective of the celestial, if we're only in the celestial, wow, all is well, the universe is unfolding as it should. The shadow of that is toxic positivity, or a friend of mine just came up with a different phrase I could use rather than the ones that mainly used, like light polarization or spiritual bypass. And she suggested the expression being light washed.
Yeah.
Which I like. But then there's the middle world, which is, hey, objective reality. What's actually happening? You know, we're in a body here on a dense planet, you know, like, and you can look at that either positively or negatively. I mean, if you look at it positively, there's 1,000 different things that could be done to turn the earth back into the Garden of Eden without the fall. But there's also like 1,000 different scenarios that it's too late. You know, it's forget about it. The oceans are finished, the atmosphere is gone, whatever, you know. So you can look at that from either side, but it's still a realistic look at, you know, what's actually taking place. And then the underworld approach is that, as far as we know, it's all about to be composted. You know, so that's basically saying surrender is the most important factor. You know, we're not in control, and so that means that if annihilation could happen at any moment, then it's all about our connection to spirit, our connection to our souls, our connection to our basic humanity. So you have all 3. But of course, if a person is just in the underworld, then you don't want it to be just all doom and gloom, or, you know, just negative. You know.
So it's about holding all 3 of those awarenesses as we move through. Right. Very powerful. Yes, that's good advice, and difficult to do in the human form, but something good, a good focus for us to have.
Well, see, the other factor there is that a person in their own individual life could primarily be in an underworld time. Mm-hmm. Or they could be in a celestial world time, so then we'll have our preferences, or individuals that are mainly just in middle world or Saturn times particularly. It's very difficult to connect with the celestial in a Saturn time. So it's harder if you're mainly involved in one of those worlds, right? But still, to understand what might be going down on the planet, that nobody really, that's maybe another factor here, is that when you have all these timelines converging, I don't think if anybody who claims to know what's actually going to happen, then their function as a prophet is to say what they think is going to happen to make sure it doesn't. So it's kind of like an astrological or psychic version of quantum mechanics. If you put your attention on it, then it shifts to something else.
Yes.
So we don't really know. So it's just to be open to miracles. That's the upper world. To take seriously what's in front of us, and then not be surprised or be unprepared if it's a really major composting, because you never know what Gaia has in mind, or what the sun has in mind, or
Yeah, right, absolutely. And these are things that I was mentioning this yesterday. You can't prepare for the apocalypse because you don't know what it's going to be, right?
Right.
And so, we need to keep our focus on, as you're saying, but on the soul, on our daily lives, on these aspects that we can build a good life, build joy and fulfillment, and hopefully there's no apocalypse. But if there is, then we've
But
done
even if there is, it's still our responsibility to take the place on the wheel of life that we were born to take. Vijar at one point said, "If you do not fulfill your dharma, you leave a hole in the universe where you were intended to be."
Wow. That's something to think about.
Right. So our goal in the school is to try to help people find what that is and, fulfill it no matter what happens. If you're a gardener, even if the world ended a year from now, you still plant a garden. It's the same thing about the whole issue about having a child. I mean, if your dharma is to be a mother, well, then just because the world situation doesn't mean you're not to do that.
Yeah.
But then others will have a different decision on that. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for all of this, Daniel. It's been really very enlightening, very profound, as your work always is. So thank you. I wonder should we take one question from the chat? Is that okay for your schedule if we take one question? And let me just look back and see. And I feel free to choose if you want to look, but I can also just pick one.
Yeah,
could be interesting. Let's see. And well, actually, before we do that, I would love to have you share for everybody, where can people find you online? Anything coming up, any announcements, projects coming up that you would like people to know about? And I'll post your free gift again in the chat here.
Our school is now in its third wave. We just birthed a new level of it in July, and so now it's the Turning of the Ages Mystery School. So we have a whole brand new website, turningoftheages.com. And then for me personally, it's fine for anybody who wanted to contact me. My email is daniel.giamario@gmail.com.
Okay.
And as far as upcoming events, I mean, actually, our school is entirely supported by our membership. And, so you might want to, if you're interested in being part of our school, there's all kinds of free stuff. I do a monthly video blog. It's free. We have solstice and equinox seminars. We have monthly members calls. I have a mentoring group I do every month. And so there's a lot of things, taking place in the school. We do have an upcoming event in April, which is the first time we've had an in-person all-school gathering. That'll happen in Oracle, Arizona, just north of Tucson in April. And there's a whole calendar of events. Just go to the website and see what interests you.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. And your free gift, once again, is the US chart resource archive. And I'm going to put that back in the chat here one more time. And again, anybody watching this later as a recording, just scroll down a little bit below the video and you'll see the link to claim Daniel's free gift. And I'm sure, so if they claim your free gift, will they be on your newsletter and receive your announcements as well?
If you go to the website, just it's a free newsletter twice a month, and then they
Okay.
can just put their email in and get it.
Okay, great.
Actually,
and would you like to say anything else about the free gift for people to?
it's 4 articles as well as a couple of videos, actually maybe a 5th article, because I did one on, I think it's in there now too, which is on the 7 months of Mars and Gemini, and a lot of different ceremonial dates and everything that's happening with the Mercury retrograde and things like that. So that's all in the same package, including the eclipse pathways, showing like where in the US there's a crisscross of the eclipse paths, where it's coming through and so on. And the charts, of those times. So yeah, and people can contact me or contact the school and get further information.
Okay. Well, fantastic. Thank you for all that you are bringing into the world here and all this wisdom that you've been developing.
It's been a pleasure really sharing with you, Jocelyn, and thank you for inviting me.
Yes, thank you so much for being a part of this event.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as another question, I think we actually answered them as we went along for the most part here. So I think we're good. The main question that's here is probably too big for anyone to answer. How do we quantum jump from the depths of Kali Yuga right into the next longed for golden age? So maybe that's one we can all.
Well, it's interesting. It's a very fascinating question. I mean, I think maybe some people might be able to, maybe are already there, or some people are can do it quickly. But I think from the perspective of middle world, I tend to think of the 300-year transition, So it's not going to be like immediate, but for some it might be.
Right, but for the collective, takes some time to turn the ship. Yes.
Right. There's a lot of work to be done to. I mean, my primary commitment these days is to really advocate for authentic, organic human beings, and I'm very much trying to warn people about the hybrid AI transhumanism kind of thing, which is I think it's the final descent into materiality is what that is. It's an attempt to prevent our DNA from connecting with spirit.
I agree. I feel very strongly about those issues. It's kind of unfathomable to me.
So glad we're on the same team.
Yes. Yes. Well, thank you again, Daniel. It's been really a pleasure speaking with you. And I wish you.
It was worth staying up for this, so I'm happy I did it.
Yes. Well, thank you. I know it's near the end of the day for you. So thank you for making this happen. Really appreciate it.
Hope to talk to you again. Bye, Jocelyn.
Yes, likewise. Bye for now. And thank you, everybody attending live. So glad to have you here. Be sure to join us again in about 3 hours, 2.5 hours. We will be here with Suzanne Gerber, a wonderful astrologer who has a really, really exciting and upbeat view. So can't wait to be with Suzanne soon. That will be at 11 a.m. New York time on 11/11. So can't wait to see you all then. And happy 11/11 to everybody out there. I will